Hi, everybody. I'm Suzanne McAllister of the Post Animal Use World Project, or PAW, Vegan Spirituality Group of Philadelphia, and Interviews with a Friendly Vegan. And welcome, B. Friedlander. Thank you for making time for chatting with me today. And I thought I'd say a little bit about how we met, which you may not even know all this, but I was at an event in downtown Philly. I think it was put on by the Humane Society, and Jonathan Balcom was the speaker, and they used to have them around holiday time. And I chatted with him after his talk and mentioned that I was a psychologist, and obviously if I was at this event, I was interested in animal advocacy and so on. And this is quite a while ago, probably 2006 or 7, I think. Anyway, Jonathan mentioned Ken Shapiro to me, and I think he either reached out to Ken or he said, reach out to Ken and use my name. I don't remember that part of it. But anyway, one thing led to another. I spoke to Ken. Ken put me in touch with you, and you were the executive director of Animals in Society when we first met. And I don't know how we decided what we were going to do, but we decided we were going to do something. And I ended up consulting, I think it was for 2 or 3 years, with Animals in Society Institute. But before, I'm interested in talking to you about what you're doing now. But before we do that, I don't think I've ever heard your story about how you got involved in, and I'm never quite sure what term to use, animal advocacy, animal rights. I'll just say an interest in animals. So if you're willing, I'm interested in hearing your journey.
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. And I did not know the Jonathan Balcom connection.
Yep.
So thank you for letting me know.
Yes.
I am one of those people who cannot say that ever since I was a little kid, I loved animals. And nobody is surprised that I ended up advocating for animals, or that they've consumed my life, basically, which is better than me consuming them.
Hey,
but
I like that.
Anyhow, I have thought about it quite a bit. And here is the best thing that I've come up with, and I actually think it's kind of a powerful story in its way. It's not that I didn't like animals. We had pets when I was little, and I've always been interested in social justice issues. However, probably beginning and this will age me, in the mid to late 80s, I realized that I started looking at issues about how we treat animals. And in the late 80s, I decided that I would become a vegetarian. And that was a vegetarian, not a vegan. It took me until the year 2000 to become a vegan. So it was a very narrow, very gentle slope of going from vegetarian to vegan. The best that I have come up with is, when I was finishing undergrad, going to law school, finishing law school, moving to New York City, and then moving back to Michigan, the one constant in my life was my dog, Erica. She was a German Shepherd. In the language that I know now, I bought her from a backyard breeder, and she was with me during that period of time when my life changed. And we were very close. she and I navigated New York City together. I chose where to live because it was close to a park. And Erica lived from 1973 to 1985. And
Wait a
in
minute.
retrospect,
That was how many? 12 years.
12 years. She
Okay.
wasn't quite 12.
Okay.
In retrospect, it was around that time that I started my interest in animal issues. And I can only think that it was her influence and an example of the human animal bond. And I started to explore the issues that we all know that animals face and we as a society face. And that is about the best explanation I can give you.
It's really interesting that it's such, I mean, it is your life and has been now for quite a while, and that there wasn't an actual experience you can point to other than this bond with an animal. I have to say, I don't know too many people who would actually come to New York with a German Shepherd. So she clearly was important to you.
She was.
Yes.
My parents probably would have taken her in, but no, she was
Yes.
coming with me. I needed her. Now, fast forward maybe, well, until the early 90s, there was an aha moment that I will always remember, and that had to do with learning about there was such a thing as animal law, because I'm an attorney. As I mentioned, I was in law school. I was an attorney all this time. And there was animal law. Animal Legal Defense Fund had been founded in the late 70s. There were a handful of attorneys, mainly on the West Coast and the East Coast, some of whom are still in practice or still involved now, who were doing animal law, but I was not aware of it. But one day in the early 90s, I was sitting in my office and I was looking at the Michigan Bar Journal, which is the monthly publication of the State Bar of Michigan, flipping through it. And my eye hit on this little notice that was taken out by a woman named Wanda Nash, an attorney named Wanda Nash. And it said something like, attorneys who are interested in animal law, contact Wanda Nash. And it was this light bulb moment. When I talk to students now, I always preface it by saying, I know you're going to find it hard to believe, but people could be attorneys at that time. People could be interested in doing animal work, volunteering at shelters or whatever, but they didn't see the connection between their profession and their passion. And just reading that notice that Wanda had taken out in the Bar Journal was all it took. And probably close to 20 attorneys responded. In those days, it was probably all telephone calls and mail and finding a spot that was somewhat equidistant among people who had signed up, and maybe using the fax machine if you were being high tech. But Attorneys for Animals was formed. That still exists. And that's what I spend most of my time volunteering on. One of the main goals of Attorneys for Animals when it was formed in the early 90s was to create an animal law section within the state bar of Michigan, which we did, and ours is the first statewide. And
in the country.
In the country, yes.
So so when you were going to law school, there was no animal law being taught?
No,
Okay.
no. There probably wasn't really much animal law. That might have occurred 5 years later, but certainly no animal law. I'm not positive, but Harvard may have been the first school to offer animal law, and it might have been in the 80s or 90s.
Okay.
And then gradually other law schools did. Excuse me. There
And
are
so
now,
was Wanda an attorney herself?
yes,
And she was interested in getting a group of attorneys together who were interested in animals. And then you started, what, developing a course that you presented to? How did that work?
We didn't do the course part. There is one professor in particular in Michigan who's been doing this since the 70s, David Favor. But our goal was not to develop and teach an animal law course, although some of our members have done that. But we have been involved with education of attorneys in taking positions on legislation and testifying.
Okay.
And basically, we have a newsletter, and basically it is to get the word out that there is such a thing as animal law. When we first were starting, we had to apply to the state bar to become an animal law section. And there was a lot of kind of derogatory, kind of silly comments. But now I think it's a respected, I know it's a respected area of the law. And
well, that was going to be one of my questions is what change you have seen over the years, because you've been involved now, you said really since the 1980s, I guess, right? So that's 40 years.
Yep.
And so you have a really nice perspective about how things have changed from a law standpoint. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. From you being in law school, there was no animal law as far as you remember, at least there wasn't where you went to school. And then you started this organization in the 80s. And where are things now?
As far as animal law, there are a number of students who go to law school because they want to do animal law. So it is known, it is recognized. I cannot give you, because I have not looked it up lately. I wish I had the number exactly of law schools that teach animal law and law schools that have student animal law groups, and states that have animal law sections. But it's an impressive number. It's not a small number. So there are various things that mark acceptance of an academic field. And in the time that I've been involved, I think most of those, we could tick off those boxes. So, and those of you who know about academics will understand. First of all, there are several case books that students can have. Second of all, there are many peer-reviewed journals. There are conferences, academic conferences in animal law. There is the American Bar Association, as well as I had mentioned, state bar associations has an animal law section. There is an organization of law school professors, and there is a cohort of them who teach animal law. So all of those things are necessary to get your foot in the door, to be accepted as an academic endeavor, and animal law has done that. In addition, and just as important and probably way more wide-reaching, is how it is accepted now among large parts of the public who look at animal issues, who are aware of how the law, and both in the court law and the legislate law that is made by the legislatures, can impact animals' lives. It isn't, in some circles, it's still kind of made fun of, but I think people understand that animals are important, and that our institutions, such as our legal institutions, have an impact on animals' lives, and that it's important enough that our institutions should be responsive. And I've seen that kind of change.
It's interesting. I mean, when you talk about people making snide comments or laughed at, my sense of that, whether it's within the law profession or just when I became vegan, the snide comments, it's often a defensive response. It's almost like there's something happens, something resonates in the other person, and they need to push back. Otherwise, they would either express interest or be indifferent. But to have to make fun of, that something is being tapped. So
I agree.
So give me an example of what, well, first of all, maybe tell me what it is that you're doing with Attorneys for Animals. Maybe talk a bit about that organization and what your role is and what you do.
It is a nonprofit. We're small and we're all volunteer. We're not a law firm, although people will sometimes reach out to us, and we have attorneys who are in practice and who are taking cases, who sometimes we're able to refer them to. A lot of what we do falls into the area of advocacy. One of the big parts of that is that we follow legislation. We're Michigan based, so we look at Michigan laws, but we also look at laws that, I'm sorry, I should say bills that have been introduced in the Michigan legislature and also in Congress. And we have a tracker. So if people are interested in bills in Congress, which in this country, everyone should be, even if they don't live in Michigan, we follow that. We take positions and we testify. One of the things that I think has been the most satisfying is that over the last maybe 4, 5, 6 years, legislators in Michigan who are interested in animal welfare will reach out to us with ideas for bills or ask us what we think is needed. Wow. So we work with legislators on that. And then we have recently kind of expanded to federal agency regulations, which sounds pretty snoozeworthy, but they're very important. So
can you give me an example?
The USDA regulates and the enforces the Animal Welfare Act. And that
poorly, I might add.
Poorly, exactly. But what they do is they promulgate these regulations, and that tells them what standards they use. And it's a constant effort to try to get them to improve their standards. So just now, and the deadline is in 2 days, they have developed standards for birds in the bird trade. So this is after over 20 years of trying to force them to finally do that. And some of the proposals are good. Others are not so good. So that's an example of a regulation.
So what I'm hearing, Dee, is that both in Michigan, but maybe also on the federal level, first of all, you're monitoring what's going on. And so you can either encourage a legislator to co-sponsor a bill or approve.
Sponsor a bill,
exactly. But you're also serving as a consultant. They may come to you and ask you, this is what we're thinking, and get some advice.
Yes. An unpaid consultant, but that's a nice way of putting it. Yes.
Yeah. That's how it sounded. And I said what I did about, the USDA. I didn't mean to sound so flip, but I was thinking about how Lolita Tokite's tank they've been relicensed every year for, I think they opened in 1950 something. And the tank from the 70s on has not met the minimum standards, but they just kept,
approving the license.
So I said it was flip, but
no, it's factual.
Yeah. I mean, I knew it was in this case, and my guess is it's not just in that case, but there are other cases. Right. So thank God there are people like you and your organization that are proposing things, monitoring things, and trying to get them to be a little bit more proactive, progressive. So another question I had for you is, are there other states that are modeling after Attorneys for Animals in other states that you're aware of? Or is Michigan kind of a standalone?
We're kind of a standalone. I've talked to people in several other states, New York in particular, and we have talked about expanding, but at this point we're small and we don't want to overextend what we're doing. But that would be a dream, would be to have other similar organizations in other states.
I mean, I would have thought that in some of these conferences that you were mentioning, that if other people from other states heard about the model that you have, that might be something that they could say, all right, why don't we do this in Delaware or Colorado or Washington, wherever, Pennsylvania. So my last
well, let me just say a couple other things on that.
Sure.
First off, there are a number of states who have animal law sections within their state bar, so that performs some of that function. Then there are a number of states who have, and this is different from Attorneys for Animals, but they're sort of lobbying. They'll have they're set up to work with the legislature in a more direct way, and even work on campaigns, which we can't do. So in New Mexico, New York, and that's not strictly attorneys, but there are a lot of organizations who work in legislation, policy, and law. It's just, I think we're unique, and invite me back in 10 years and maybe we'll have a franchise going on or
Well,
something.
it just seems that you've created something, and it certainly could be replicated and be of use. So I'm just watching the clock. So I have a couple of other questions. In your long involvement in animal advocacy, what are you most proud of?
Oh boy. You mean personally or as a movement?
Why don't we stay with personally, and maybe we'll go on to a movement.
I guess, and this is kind of off the top, I guess I would have to say one of the things about working in animal issues is you have a wide variety of colleagues and friends of many ages. And I think probably what I'm most proud of is I have a number of, I hate this term, mentees. I'm their mentor, which is a better term. But I'm very proud of these people that I've encouraged, and I watched their careers. They're doing wonderful work for animals, and they have decades ahead of them.
That's
So
wonderful.
I think that would have to be my
Yeah.
answer.
That's a real legacy. And then you can answer this either personally or more globally. What's your biggest disappointment in terms of your long history in advocacy, of what hasn't happened, or what maybe something that you worked on really hard and it didn't happen?
I think it's that issues that you think have been resolved, you have to always be vigilant, because there are people out there who are making money out of using animals, and they can come back in different forms.
And is there a particular situation that you're thinking about?
Well, there are a number of them. I'll give you one. This is not an issue that I've been personally involved with, but it's a good illustration. Back twice, California voters approved standards for the care of farmed animals in confinement. It gave some relief to these animals. And the factory farm interests kept plugging away and chipping away and trying to overturn these. And for a number of years, they were not successful. But recently, the pork producers and those trade associations have used this kind of novel theory and to challenge the California law now as it relates to products from other states products.
Yes.
Dairy,
yes.
Coming into the state. And the US Supreme Court has agreed to hear their appeal, the pork producers' appeal. And I think I don't have to get political to say that the composition of the current Supreme Court has me and a lot of other people worried that states will not be able to regulate how animals are treated within their borders as regards products coming in from other states.
I mean, we don't have time to get into this, but I'm thinking, if I've understood what you were just saying, how ironic, since they're about to overturn Roe,
Yes.
where they are giving it back to the states, and they're all for the states running the show. So, but
Yep.
that's a discussion for another day. But I wanted to just really thank you for talking about, what it's like when you're in doing this work, but from the legal perspective, which is your profession and what you've been doing all these years, having your legal background and now working for an organization that's specific to attorneys. And I will put in, when I post this on YouTube, this interview will be posted on YouTube. I will put the link to Attorneys for Animals. I'll put the link for Animals in Society Institute so that people can look that up. And I failed to mention when I talked about Jonathan Balcom, for those who don't know who he is, he's an ethnologist and an author and a speaker, but I think mostly in the last couple of years, mostly author, since very few people are out speaking anymore during the pandemic. But anyway.
Except on Zoom.
Yes. And so I will also put information about Jonathan on the, when I post this, but thank you so much for making time. And do you want to show the logo on your shirt? Because you wore this beautiful shirt.
Can you see?
Yes.
On the back, and I'm not going to turn around, it will say Attorneys for Animals.
Okay.
But thank you, Suzanne. And I appreciate the work that you and Ann are doing with PAW.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
With this series.
Fun, and who knows where it's going to go, but we're having fun and getting a pretty positive reception. So thank you very much. And
well, you're welcome.
All right.
I enjoyed it.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.